Welcome to the Neijiaquan podcast. My name is Isaac Kamens. This is a bi-weekly podcast where my friend Jess O'Brien and I discuss internal martial arts, qigong, and meditation. This week we begin our discussion on another great Ba Gua master. This is Ma Gui, aka Ma Shijing, aka Wood Ma. We talk about Ma's early life, his training with Yin Fu and Neijiaquan. Then we talk about his teaching style, and we take directly from Liu Hung Chieh's accounts of training with Ma when Ma lived with Liu Hung Chieh. In our Patreon, we continue our series on the spiraling energy body Qigong. We get into the nuts and bolts of spiraling a little bit, what the process is for creating the spirals and linking the spirals to your lower dantian. So check that out and hope you enjoy the episode. Thanks for listening. Thanks for your support and take care.
Welcome to the Neijiaquan podcast with Isaac and Jess. We're continuing our look at the great masters of the Ba Gua Zhang tradition. Today we wanted to talk about a pretty well-known figure in the Ba Gua world known as Ma Gui. He's one of the more famous Ba Gua students, and we became interested in him in reading The Power of Internal Martial Arts. It talks a lot about him and his relationship with Grandmaster Liu Hung Chieh. And Grandmaster Liu Hung Chieh was at the center of sort of this time period in China and Beijing when a lot of great martial artists were coming through and a lot of martial arts innovation was happening. And I think Ma Gui was a huge influence on him and his teacher, Liu Zhenlin. And so we wanted to dig into his history and talk a little bit about his training. And why don't I pull from Ba Gua Journal, December 1993. That's an article about Ma Gui. Yin Fu's top Ba Gua Zhang student was Ma Gui. He was born in 1853 and lived to 1940. And just like to take a second there, Isaac, that's a pretty amazing lifespan from 1853. So that's basically the time of the gold rush all the way to 1940. It's just striking me now that that's why his name comes up so much when people talk about Ba Gua, because he was there the whole time. He knew the Grandmaster, the founder of the art, Neijiaquan. He was there for that time period and then survived long enough to meet people up until 1940. I mean, that's people of our grandparents' generation. So that's quite amazing to even think about that. But going back to 1850s, Ma was thin and weak when he was young and did not like to talk very much. His family was in the woodworking business, and thus he was known as Wood Ma. He began studying Ba Gua Zhang from Yin Fu when he was 18 years old. Although Ma is listed as Yin Fu's student, he also had the opportunity to study a bit with Neijiaquan, and thus Ma's name is listed on Dong's original gravestone. One year there was a New Year's celebration, and many students and grand students came to pay their respects to Dong. Ma Gui was a small, strange-looking man. When Dong saw Ma, he said, "You look strange. Who are you and what do you do?" Ma told Dong who he was and that he liked to paint crab shells and sold them as ornaments. Dong said, "I'm going to teach you the crab palm." He taught Ma Gui this one palm, and it became his trademark. Ma Gui was known for attacking an opponent by striking with the back of his wrist, and he was also highly skilled at Dian Shui, point striking, or death touch. It is said that Neijiaquan lived in Ma Gui's home for a short period of time after he left the palace of Prince Su. That's pretty cool. I've never heard of crab palm techniques.
Nope.
That's new to me. But it must have something to do with striking points where you like hit the vulnerable pressure points on somebody's body. But I guess, and so it says here that Dong and Ma lived together. So that means, the story always is like Neijiaquan died, I believe, 1883, and he left the palace 10 years before he died. So that would be the 1870s, somewhere in there. It says later in his career, Ma worked as a guard at Prince Su's palace. So it sounds like that's who Neijiaquan had worked for. So Ma went to work for him as a guard and was hired to guard the presidential residence after the establishment of the Republic. Wow, so he went to working from the Qing Dynasty emperor to the Republic of China president. Must have been pretty good.
good bodyguards are hard to come by, I guess.
Right. Just switch sides when the time comes. So then going on from there, in 1919, he was hired to teach martial arts to the military. In 1928, he was hired as a senior advisor to the Hebei Martial Arts Academy. That's the same period of time when Liu Hung Chieh entered the armed forces as well.
Right, and that's that period where all of those martial arts associations are forming, and the beginnings of the Guoshuguan are starting to take, root. And I think he was one of the initial kind of heads of that whole movement.
Yeah, he must have been pretty influential. Another reason why we hear so much about him in the...
I think he taught in a police academy or something as well.
Yeah. So maybe having him around was like prestigious, so people would try to get him involved with.
Yeah, I mean, I think he was also a badass who could, was good at training people. So,
right. Must have been.
This is that
if he made it this far.
Well, he's one of those people that made the transition from, martial arts as a military thing to martial arts as a quote unquote sort of civilian thing, because, by the, in the 1870s, 1880s,
right.
Martial arts were still used as a form of bodyguard protection.
Yeah.
By the 1920, firearms are in play, and you don't need to pay, 7 guys to protect your convoy. You can just get one guy with a rifle and he can, do the job. So martial artists had to find a new form of income, and that was, this sort of bodyguard civilian work and just sort of the things that people who know how to fight do.
Yeah, and of the 1920s, there was a lot of fighting going on, so he was clearly in need,
Right, and also for if you want to train military and police people, a good place to start is to find people who have actually fought, and then you take them and you say, okay, we'll teach our guys how to fight.
What works, what's proven effective,
especially if they're good at sort of distilling it down to just application. And it sounds like from all accounts, Ma Gui was very much a scrapper.
Yep. So it says here, although Ma Gui was highly skilled, he seldom taught his students thoroughly. Some say that Ma Gui was a very conservative teacher, while others say he did not teach deeply because none of his students met his high requirements. Although a lot of students got bits and pieces from Ma Gui, it is said that only a few, if any, got all of Ma's complete art. And that tracks a little bit with what Bruce Francis says in The Power of Internal Martial Arts, where Liu Hung Chieh met this guy later in life and was coached and taught by him, but not as his official student, but as a mentor and advisor kind of.
I think it's Liu Jinglin went to Ma Gui and said, I want to learn with you. And he said, nah, you ain't ready yet, son. And recommended that he go find Liang Zaiwen. And so he went and trained with this other guy for a bit, and then he came back, and then Ma Gui was like, all right, well, now I'll sort of tune you up a little bit. So I think there was a community of these guys where it was like, all right, well, if you can prove yourself to that guy, I'll take you under my wing. And so Ma Gui was more, I think, of became kind of like a finishing school for a lot of these guys,
like PhD level. You've already gone through your main schooling before you get to him.
I mean, my guess is, of those reasons, it was all of the above, right? That he didn't teach a lot of people, more probably because it doesn't serve you much to put a whole lot of effort into something if you're not going to get much back, right? And so I think from his point of view, it was like, what's the point of me, spending 20 years teaching one person when I can just kind of spread my thing around and give a little bit here, a little bit there, and not be kind of locked into a particular, situation.
Sure.
Sort of that the free agent. And I think Liu Duquan was like that too. They just kind of were able to move freely in these different groups because
they may have had their really close disciples, but they were also helping other people's students reach a higher level, and very few of their own students. And as you mentioned, those two guys were both technically students of the founder, so they had a sort of street cred that allowed them to cross between groups much more easily.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, is that they were kind of this upper echelon.
Exactly.
The rules don't quite apply to them,
Right. So now I'd like to turn to The Power of Internal Martial Arts by B.K. Francis, 1998. We have a section here in the back where he profiles Liu Hung Chieh, and in that profile, he discusses some of his teachers. Now I'd like to turn to the section where Grandmaster Liu Hung Chieh meets and learns from Ma Gui. After the original school disbanded, Liu continued to learn from the people he had met there for another decade. Zhu Wenbao initially taught Liu the meditation techniques of Ba Gua. However, the person whom Liu credited with teaching him the most about Ba Gua, both in terms of its meditation work and in the mastery of Qi, was Ma Gui. One of the top 4 students of Dong Haichuan, Ma took no formal disciples. However, Ma liked Liu Hung Chieh and introduced him to the higher level energy work that Ma had learned from Dong Haichuan, the founder. Very old at the time and fond of drinking, Ma said that it was a pity he had not met Liu when he was younger. Liu Hung Chieh always said that although his Ba Gua movements were basically those of the Cheng school, the most critical aspect of his internal Qi work came from Ma Gui. So that's a pretty interesting section there. He says that Ma Gui was really into the Ba Gua meditation techniques and the internal Qi work.
Yeah, that pretty much tracks with what I've been told.
Because if you go to B.K. Francis' class, he teaches a lot of that type of stuff. That's what he's all about. It sounds like those guys shared an enjoyment and love for the meditative side of things that, again, lots of Ba Gua schools don't. They don't care about that, and for good reason. They're too busy training to kick ass. Like if they don't want to, it's not like you're worse for not having it. It's just that some people were more into it than others, I think, is a point we've tried to make over the years. As we've explored these different teachers.
I would say you would be worse for it if you don't actually address some of the mental things that go along with doing martial arts. So I kind of disagree with you on that.
Yeah. We'll expand on that. What do you mean?
Well, I think what all of these guys were talking about was that if you're going to do martial arts, you also have to do something to calm your mind. And this happens to have a built-in method of, you can do it while you do your martial art, but it's
right, 2 for 1.
You don't just do one and not the other. Is all of these guys have said that from
it's true.
Every single dude we've talked about has said you have to do something. They don't know, it's not always the same
thing
amount or the same thing, but you've got to do something. Otherwise,
that's a good takeaway. Because we have seen that thread between all the different teachers. Now, maybe, even if we go back to the Xingyi guys we were talking about earlier this season, plenty of them had that same connection to either Taoist meditation or Buddhist meditation or some kind of inner energy work that grounded them and gave them a deeper sense
of them had something about either connecting to the microcosmic orbit, the breathing,
the Dantian for sure comes up over and over.
These are all parts of, if not the whole piece of, getting your mind to be centered and calm when you do martial arts, and not just go ape shit when you the slightest thing happens.
Right.
And I think that may be a part of Ma Gui's reluctance to teach a lot of people also. One of the stories I heard is that he early on had a student who kind of did something uncool or something like that. And so that kind of soured him on it. And so he wasn't as willing to give it freely, because it was like, well, what are you going to do with this if I give it to you?
And the meditation stuff's not easy. That's hard work to teach and to learn. So I can see wouldn't want to just throw that around.
And they're not doing the meditation stuff when they're 20 either. Right. That's the other part of this, is most of these guys, they're not saying, when you start out, you should be a Taoist meditation master. They're saying the practice eventually gets you to the point
direction
of being, of addressing the sort of mental aspect of this whole thing, and spiritual aspect of it. But back to this, it's like, I think Ma Gui was, like Liu Hung Chieh, seemingly like Dong Haichuan and Chen Tinghua, had this interest in meditation as a subject
Right.
that also fit with, Ba Gua Zhang, because
Right.
you had a meditation based on the I Ching, and you have a martial art based on the I Ching, and they kind of,
It's fairly
melds,
natural connection
right,
there.
it melds together pretty easily.
Right. It's easy connection to make. And yeah, that's the same point I was sensing here too, of like, this side of the art is especially emphasized by Master Ma Gui and by Master Liu Hung Chieh. We're just, bottom line, they liked it, they were into it, and it's part of their school. So you're gonna encounter that when you train in their system.
I mean, there's the same parallel in samurais in Japan, right, or whatever. I mean,
sure.
Lots
Asian
of
fighting arts always incorporate some kind of spirituality.
Right. They don't always do it at the same time. That's, I think, the unique thing about Ba Gua is that it's
meditate out separately. You do Zen meditation or something.
Well, within your forms, you have a meditation rather than doing a seated meditation and then doing martial arts, which works just fine too. Wu style Tai Chi has a meditation tradition because Wu Jianchuan was into meditation. The Yang style Tai Chi doesn't really have a meditation tradition because Zhang Wuchan and Yang Cheng Fu weren't that into meditation, as a thing. So, it just didn't become part of
Not everyone loves it.
Right. So that was the thing that Liu Hung Chieh had in common with Wu Jianchuan. It's the thing he had in common with Liu Jinglin. It's the thing he had in common with probably most of the people that he trained with, because that's what he was attracted to.
Right. After a certain point in his life, that's what he was most excited about. So he just kept following that thread to eventually going way out into the mountains to find more people to do it with way out there. So like you could tell this guy was
that's going
crazy
to the point of not caring about the martial arts at all, and just wanting to do
abandoning your friends and family for a decade is like,
that's also a fairly
pretty extreme.
In the Patreon episode, we talked about his Buddhist teacher Tanshu, and he did the same thing, right? He took off and left his family and went and meditated for a couple decades.
Some people got to do it,
That is, and I think it's more acceptable, or was more acceptable at that time to, if you will, pursue a spiritual path, right? That part of the cultural thing was, if you've done your familial duties, you've had your child and you've taken care of your wife and they're set up, if you want to go spend a few years in the mountains, that you're culturally allowed to do that.
Right.
And so
if you got the dough, go for it.
I don't think it was seen as like a negative thing to say, I'm going to go spend, a few years in the monastery and find myself.
I mean, I guess, one's wife might be concerned, but you're right. There's a cultural precedent for that doesn't exist in the West at this point. That's for sure.
I mean, I've only heard Bruce talk about Leo's family in very limited amounts, but from what I understand, there was no, they weren't mad at him for doing it. It was like, that was what he wanted to do, and they were fine with their lives, and he set them up. And I don't think it was like, had no contact with them. It was just,
Yeah, that's a pretty mysterious period of time for sure. So I wanted to pull something else from this background that's in the same little appendix here. Early in his Ba Gua training, Liu Hung Chieh also studied Yin Fu's walking method. He trained with some of Yin Fu's students who worked out at Cheng Yulong's Ba Gua school. At that time, Ba Gua was one school without branches. It was only later that the styles became separated. So he did meet, here he's saying exactly in the book that he trained with some of Yin Fu's students at the Ba Gua school where he was enrolled. So that would include potentially a guy like Ma Gui, although hard to say, but almost definitely the other student of Yin Fu, Li Yangqing, who we'll talk about in the near future. So now I wanted to turn to a little bit more out of the Appendix B section here in Power of Internal Martial Arts. He gives a little bit of Ma Gui's background, which is similar to what we said before. Ma Gui studied with Yin Fu for the first several years of his Ba Gua training, and afterwards studied directly with Dong Haichuan in his house. Much of the firsthand history of Ba Gua given to the author came directly from Liu Hung Chieh, who heard it directly from Ma Gui when he was Ma's private student. Ma took no formal disciples, and he taught Liu only when he was older. Ma did not like to teach. He owned a successful lumber business in which he made enough money to make it unnecessary for him to earn his living as a professional Ba Gua teacher. Ma Gui told Liu Hung Chieh how Dong Haichuan, the founder, had taught. Dong frequently would sit with his eyes closed, describe every motion Ma was making, and tell him to adjust it one way or another. Dong used to sit and meditate for hours every day. The basis of his martial power, at least according to Ma Gui, was at least as much due to his sitting practices, which were pure Taoist meditation, as to his martial arts techniques.
There you go.
That's pretty wild.
Yeah. I mean,
so Ma would practice, moving around, and Dong would have his eyes closed and adjust him and describe what he was doing and tell him, how to improve it.
Mm-hmm.
What do you call that?
I mean, that's the transmission. I mean, if you've ever had that experience, you know exactly what it feels like. And if you haven't, you probably think I sound crazy. But there is a piece of this stuff that, there's a mind-to-mind transmission that takes place. And if the person knows how to do it, it's freaking wild. And sounds like that's what he's talking about, is that ability to now, that whole thing of like having your eyes closed, that's a whole next level. But, there is an energetic transmission that happens in this stuff. And you can do it just by smacking somebody around. You can do it by grabbing them and twisting their body and physically adjusting them.
Mm-hmm.
You can do it by making funny sounds. You can do it by directly putting your intent into their body. And that's what he's talking about, is you can transmit what you're doing into another person. And that's how this stuff was taught. Originally, it wasn't taught through a whole lot of talking. It was taught through, you do it, the teacher kind of blasts you with this imprint of what it feels like, and you spend the rest of your damn life trying to emulate that feeling of what it felt like when they did it to you. And so it's like you get the seed when they do the transmission, and you do the practice to grow the seed. And this is this is how Buddhist meditation works. This is how Taoist meditation works. You go to the teacher, they give you the empowerment, and then you sit for 10 years and try to make that thing happen. It's no different with this stuff. There's a direct tradition of Ba Gua Zhang as a meditative art, connecting it to the I Ching. And for every movement, there is a meditative sort of energetic thing that you're doing. So like I said, if you are into that sort of thing, it's pretty cool. And if you're not, you think it'll sound nuts right now.
Right. I wanted to pull another paragraph here where BK Francis talks about his training with Liu Hung Chieh. Liu told how his teacher, Ma Gui, used to practice with swords or empty-handed, while Dong Haichuan was sitting meditating. With his eyes closed, Dong would correct Ma and tell him what to do. When Liu did it to me, I could feel his energy bubbling inside my system. He did not say anything. His energy would simply start coming through. His method of teaching involved some physical correction and instruction, but he relied primarily on such qi transmissions. So yeah, that's definitely a little bit out there, but it sounds pretty damn cool.
Well, I mean, again, if you take the founders on their word and you believe, say, okay, well, if they're saying that's what it is, then that's how you do these sorts of things. I mean, they don't write down, you do a mind-to-mind transmission, because it was kind of common knowledge that if you wanted to get a spiritual thing, you had to do that. That when they talk about, developing the heavenly orbit or the bellows way or any of these Taoist techniques, what they're really saying is you got to go find yourself a teacher who can teach you how to do this stuff.
Right.
And hopefully it's your Ba Gua teacher. But if it isn't, then, you got to.
Right. That would make things simpler if you could learn both from one place. Although the training, one note about that is, like, if you want to do meditation and martial arts, it's twice the work. It might even be 10 times as much work. To add all that stuff to it is a pain in the ass. Like, it takes tons of mental effort to try and tap into that stuff. Now you take it one day at a time and put some work into it. But if you want to learn two different things, you got to work twice as hard. That's pretty much the rule.
I've always seen it as there are three aspects to all of these arts. There's the health part, so the physical sort of fitness aspect of it. There's the martial art part of it, and then there's the mental / spiritual part of it, right? And any of these arts can be a container for all three or just one of those, right? Xingyi the least as far as just being a meditative art, but the idea that we'll probably get to more of this later, but there are people in mountains in Tibet who just walk circles. They don't do Bagua, they just walk in circles,
right?
And they go round and round and round while they meditate, and it's the same thing. It's just their container doesn't contain any martial arts, right? So Bruce will often talk about the monastic Bagua in quotation marks, which doesn't exist.
Right. He doesn't mean Bagua, the martial art. He means monastic circle walking, right? Within Taoism,
right? That he means Taoist monastic, meditative circle walking. That has nothing to do with the martial.
That's just sort of a shortened phrase from monastic circle walking techniques that were transmitted to people who turned it into a martial art, which then transmitted to people who's also like Taoism, and it circles back in on itself.
The same way
you say meditative Bagua is your shortcut, but
the same way when you do something like energy gates, it's a container for most of the things you do when you do something like Tai Chi, right? It's the same sort of thing. It can be that container, but it doesn't have to be that form. Right. So the Bagua meditation, the Tai Chi meditation, and the sitting meditation all basically use the same methods, right? Same techniques. And it's just about what sort of mode of transportation you're doing it, right? So there's 5 modes of practice, right? You can lie down, you can sit down, you can stand up, you can move, and you can interact with another person, right? So the moving, standing, interacting with another person are the ones that tend to be focused on in something like Ba Gua Zhang, right? The lying down stuff, not so much. So they kind of have their place, but this is just sort of one mode of doing it, is to do it within a movie.
Yeah, that's like a lesson we keep coming across again and again, how you can use it's an amazing part of especially Asian martial arts and Asian meditative traditions, that there's ways to move as well as to pray or to sit and meditate. There's this physical side to it that is pretty interesting and enriching, I think.
Yeah, well, there was a melding. I mean, I think that's just from being around for so long, but there's a melding between the Taoist sort of spiritual tradition and the Taoist health tradition, the acupuncture, qigong side of things, right? That at some point they somebody started to do them say, hey, we can kind of mix these two things up.
Seems like the 20th century, a lot of old stuff kind of conglomerated and coalesced and became more codified, kind of, it seems like. That's my impression.
That's another way of saying a lot of it got eliminated.
Right. A lot of it got machine gunned out.
Well, and what was left had to solidify in some way in order to keep going, because you were up against a force that wanted to destroy you. So it made a lot of sense not to spread yourself.
Right. Don't stick your neck out. Right. Everybody sort of retreat. I mean, I imagine that must go through history. There's times of expansion and innovation, and there's times of conservative regathering, and martial arts is going through those waves.
But there was a whole movement in, all over the world, essentially, in the 1920s and 30s to sort of modernize literature and art and all of these things. And martial arts was no different. There was a whole movement to kind of take the mysticism out of it and make it accessible to, the modern man.
Right.
And then later, people would sort of put some of the mysticism back in every so often because
For sure.
it would sort of get popularized.
Right. If that rises back in popularity, you got to put it back in.
But, that's just how these arts kind of work. Because what I think is starting to creep into the sort of sport part of martial arts is that it's what I keep talking about, which is what happens afterward. Right?
Mm-hmm.
After you fight, where does your mind go? What damage was done to your body? And if you start looking at these guys as they get older, it's pretty evident that a lot of these dudes aren't taking care of their minds and their bodies very well. That
contact sports takes a toll.
They're running hard when they're young, and when they get older, it's drugs and alcohol to keep yourself from feeling how fucked up you are.
I mean, think of the old time boxing that Frank Allen was telling us, where that in between rounds you take shots of gin, not water.
Oh well, I mean that didn't matter what sport you were doing.
Right, just fucking whacking yourself out. Well, I wanted to pull one more little story here about Ma Gui from the Ba Gua Power of Internal Martial Arts. The story of Ba Gua versus Tai Chi. It says, one well-known story about Ma Gui goes as follows. Yang Luchan of Yang Family Tai Chi had his three top students. One was Tren Wu, who created the Wu-style Tai Chi, known for his transformational energy. Then there was Ling Shan, who had the soft energy, and Wang Chun had the hard energy of Tai Chi. On one occasion, Wang Chun and Ma Gui came to blows. Wang Chun went flying out the door twice, the second time taking the door with him. This incident is probably the only reported case of fighting between top Tai Chi and Ba Gua people. As a rule in the Ba Gua school, there has never been bad blood with any members of the Tai Chi school, as has sometimes been the case between other martial arts systems. Tai Chi and Ba Gua share most of the same principles. They differ only in the specific ways in which they apply those principles.
Hey folks, Isaac here. Just a quick reminder, check out the Instagram for images to go along with the episodes. Like and subscribe, tell a friend. Also check out the Patreon for interviews, exclusive episodes, and bonus content. All right, take care of yourself, and thanks for listening.